Oli here, and Happy New Year to everyone. And this is my review of Day of the Daleks, the first story of the ninth season of classic Doctor Who, starring John Pertwee as the Third Doctor. Day of the Daleks is the 60th story overall. It's 4 episodes long and is written by Louis Marks, who obviously going by the story's title. This is the first story since 1967's The Evil of the Daleks to feature the Daleks in a full capacity, and seeing that this is the new year, I thought it would be a great way to kick off this new season. And obviously, this story actually aired in New Year's Day 1972. So the plot of the story is as follows: on Earth in the 22nd century, Daleks have enslaved the planet and humans live in fear of their masters. Meanwhile, back in the 20th century, a peace conference is urgently needed to prevent World War III. When reports reach UNIT of a ghost at Orderly House, the site of the conference, the Doctor and Joe decide to investigate. Danger is waiting for them there, including a trip to 200 years into the future without the TARDIS. Day of the Daleks, I would say that this is a good story, but seeing as the Daleks haven't been used in 5 years, it's pretty obvious that it's going to take time to get used to seeing the Daleks again. And considering the fact Dalek Mania probably has died down around 1972 because of the introduction of monsters like the Cybermen, Ice Warriors, Yeti, and all that. And there was a lot of faults in this story, and those faults were actually fixed in the 2011 special edition of this DVD. Right here. The production was alright, but I do feel that the budget that was given to the story actually stunted the product, how good it could have been. The script was good. The sets were decent. I mean, the only set we saw was the Orderly House set and the 22nd century Earth where the Daleks had operated with the controller, and that was pretty much it. The direction by Paul Bernard, was decent, but he could have done a lot better because I think towards the end he didn't really want to shoot or to film the bit where that would explain the Doctor and Joe seeing them future selves in episode 1. And that didn't really explain that afterwards. This story does have some faults, as I explained before, and the main fault actually stems from only 3 Daleks used throughout the entire story, even though there's implied to be more Daleks. But I think they'll try to use those 3 Daleks with the implication that there were more Daleks there, and it did look pretty good, especially between the battle between UNIT and the Daleks in the 20th century in the Orderly House. It did, with the Ogrons, it did look very sus, to say the least, and it didn't look really well. But in the 2011 special edition that was released on DVD, they actually do fix it by adding more computer Daleks, and it does make the battle seem a bit better looking, to say the least. And I think the other faults as well, such as the Daleks' voices, was also fixed in the special edition as well. I'd say the plot of this story was interesting and it felt very original. I like the idea of people, especially the guerrilla group, traveling from the future back in time to assassinate someone want to have been caused of death and destruction, i.e., they thought it was Sir Reginald Styles, but it actually wasn't. And the whole fault of how the Daleks took over the 22nd century was their own fault, trying to prevent the whole timeline from happening. But I think the way they explained it was slightly confusing. I didn't really like that. I think when I was reading up a bit the story, I think I understood it a little bit more, but I think watching it was a bit blurry, to say the least. And the plot of this story actually predates the Terminator by a good 12 years, and I found that rather funny. And I actually like the fact that the Daleks were back now, considering the fact that they were away for 5 years, and the time that they were away, they were either being turned down to appear, or I think this is another opportunity for Doctor Who to try and build on to other secondary villains, like, as I mentioned before, the Cybermen, the Yeti, the Ice Warriors, and the Autons. And they did a good job. But it's definitely nice to see the Daleks again, and it felt as if that Doctor Who is starting to go back to its old roots, despite the fact the Doctor's still in exile, and Doctor is starting to travel a bit more in season 9. But it was still good, to say the least. It was good, but not the best. But it could have been better, but it was still decent. John Pertwee did a good job as usual, and he actually said it himself that he never really liked working with the Daleks as he found them rather difficult to act alongside. And in the two other Dalek stories that in his era, and those are Planet of the Daleks and Death to the Daleks, it was pretty obvious that he was actually struggling to work alongside the Daleks, and I think he preferred working with the Ogrons instead because they were easier to interact with other than the Daleks themselves. And I actually liked the bit when the Doctor was indulging Gorgonzola cheese in the orderly house, and where he was actually trying to pretend to be Reginald Styles to try and figure out what the guerrilla group were actually doing. There was a bit in the story I didn't really like when the Doctor decided to shoot and kill an Ogron for no reason. I mean, he didn't really have any reason to kill an Ogron. It felt very out of character and it didn't really serve any sort of purpose to the plot, to be honest. Katie Manning, she was okay in the story, and she, alongside John Pertwee, have said it themselves that they also thought that the whole but Dalek battle in Orderly House in the 20th century was very weird, considering the fact there was only 3 Daleks that were used, even though there were actually 2 that were used throughout the battle, and how they're trying to make it as if there were more Daleks than there were on set. So it was very, as they said, it was a very pathetic affair, and I can see why, and it's good that they actually fixed it in the special edition. But yeah, so Jo, speaking on Jo, she doesn't really do a whole lot other than to accidentally teleport herself in the 22nd century. Nicholas Courtney was right at the Brigadier. Even though he doesn't really do a whole lot other than because most of the focus of the story was on the 22nd century and the Daleks. And he pretty much spent the whole story looking for the Doctor and then who is in the 22nd century, and then when they do come back, he's with the Daleks and all that. And I would actually say the same thing for Yates and Benton as well. I mean, they do a good job, and the actors were okay, and I like the bit when Yates was telling Jo that ranks has its benefits when he steals some food from Benton. So on to the side characters, we had the guerrilla group from the 22nd century, their leader Anat and her companions Shura, who is actually one of the main causes of the whole issue of the storyline with the whole Daleks taking over because I think Orderly House blew up with him inside, and that's what caused the whole thing in the first place. And we also had her other companion Boaz. They were all good characters, especially Anat. I think she did a very good job in the story. And we also had Sir Reginald Styles. He was the target of the guerrillas because they thought he was going to betray the delegates for, of course, power, and in which would cause the Daleks to take over. Styles was a stubborn man, which they actually thought that he was greedy, the guerrillas, but he was actually a good man, a good-natured man, and he actually did a good job, to say the least. And we also have the Daleks as the main villains. It's nice to see them back, as they were written well, even though there were only 3 Daleks used, with the implication that there were more Daleks in the story. And as I mentioned before, the 3 Daleks in the Orderly House battle, it did look a bit weird, and the Dalek voices, the Dalek voices, now more onto that, they did sound very, I don't know how to describe it, but it was just, it didn't really sound Dalek-like. It was just, I don't know, but they do sound better when they do return in the next season, but it was just, they just sounded weird, and I didn't really like that at all. But they do, the Dalek voices are replaced by Nicholas Briggs, who voices the Daleks, Cybermen, and other villains in the New Who. He did a good job, but considering the fact that I still had problems with it because Nicholas Briggs voicing it as the Daleks, and especially in stories like this in Classic Who, it felt very out of place because when you're used to watching like New Who and the Dalek stories, and you have like Daleks talking over like with Marigold's music at the back, and having the Daleks talk here, it just, I don't know, it just sounded weird, and it felt very out of place. But it was a good fix, but it didn't really improve much, to say the least. Our next villains, we have the Ogrons. They were okay, but I felt as if they were merely henchmen for the Daleks, nothing else. And the next story they appear in, Frontier in Space, they are written a lot better than they actually have more stuff to do other than just being henchmen, as they were actually working for the Master, and we do actually see their home planet, for I think that's where the last two episodes actually take place, and yeah, I would say that the Orgons were better written in Frontier in Space than they were in this story. And finally, we have the Controller. He was the leader of the Dalek government, and he actually managed to convince Joe that the gorillas were actually bad. But then he actually was able. But when the Doctor does actually arrive, he tries to get the Doctor to see what was going on, but the Doctor didn't really agree with him, and the Doctor pretty much insulted him, calling him. I can't remember what it was called. I think I saw it somewhere, but it was an insult really. And then I think the Controller later realized that the Daleks weren't actually as good as they were, and he believed that the Doctor would be the ones to overthrow the Daleks, and he actually got a good death, to say the least. And when the Daleks were about to exterminate him, the Controller was like, who knows, maybe you've been exterminated already, we just don't know it. I mean, he was a good character and a Zed villain, and I like the way he betrayed the Daleks at the end. Thought of this story. As I mentioned before, the budget of this story has actually affected the production. It wasn't really satisfying, especially with the three Daleks in the orderly house, and I actually do agree with what Katie Mann and John Pertwee said. It did look very unrealistic and a bit silly. And the said battle in the orderly house pretty much took place in the last 5 to 10 minutes of episode 4, and it was very rushed as well. I mean, and I remember watching it, my mind actually kind of drifted off because how they pretty much dragged it out in episode 4, and then when it came to the battle, there were just Daleks shooting, unit soldiers dying, and fun fact, I actually met one of the soldiers that worked in this story. One of the unit soldiers in the story, he works in the Who shop in Barking. And then yeah, but that was pretty much it. And then when Orderly House gets blown up, the Doctor and Joe talk to Reginald Styles, and that was pretty much it. So to say that the conclusion was rushed, as well as the battle between the units and the Daleks and the Ogrons, it was rushed. And I didn't really like that. It could have honestly benefited from being a 5-parter and maybe having the 5th and final part focused on the battle itself, and we would have at least gotten some explanation with the Doctor and Joe going back to see their past selves, and that would have explained how they were able to see their future selves. It was in episode 1. So to conclude this review, The Day of the Daleks was a nice welcome back for the Daleks with a Terminator-esque plot, but the direction of this story made this the weakest season opener for the Pertwee era, and I gave Day of the Daleks a 7 out of 10. My next review will be The Curse of Peladon, and one of my near favourite stories of this season of the Pertwee era. So thanks for watching this review. Let me know what you thought of this story and this review, and please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. Until then, ta-ra!